Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the new year, and this is the first book review for 2020 before I do this year's reading list. I couldn't quite think of a better review to start the year off with than the review that has been delayed time and time again. Let's talk about Anthony Ryan's Blood Song. I borrowed this from a friend of mine early last year and started it and then put it down, and then I started it again and I put it down again, and I couldn't get into it, and eventually in sort of mid-November or early December last year, wow, it's crazy to think that was just a few days. 2019 was just a few days ago. But yeah, I picked it up and I basically gave myself a punch in the jaw, metaphorically speaking, um, and actually sat down and I read through it and I enjoyed it. Um, so the book, I'm not gonna lie, there are some problems that I have with it, but it's not terrible. So first off, what is the plot? Uh, the book. This is the first book in the Raven's Shadow trilogy. Yes, I had to check. And this first book, it follows Vaelin Al Sorna, and I hope that I pronounced that name correctly. It's basically him on his way to single combat or execution, what's supposed to be his execution, and on the voyage to this fight or execution, whatever you want to call it, he talks to a scribe and kind of relays his life story, talking about how as a child he is put into this group called the Sixth Order, and they are basically the ninjas of this particular world, if that makes any sense. They do fight, but as one of the instructors puts it, the Order fights, but often in shadow without glory or reward. So they essentially don't exist, at least in theory. Yeah, so that's basically it. It kind of talks about that, and then it benches off into his final test, and goes from the final test into his deployment into various war zones for the king, and culminates with his arrival and the subsequent battle to decide whether or not he lives or dies, kind of thing. Now, I hope I didn't. I've tried to keep that synopsis as vague as possible. This book is actually really good, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it yet. So, yeah. Anyway, pros and cons. Let's see. Let's start with the positives. I liked the world. Anthony Ryan has put a tremendous amount of detail into putting this world together. And it shows. I mean, I think there's a little interview here in the back, and I think it says somewhere here where that yeah, right here at the start, the guy that's doing the interview says, basically asks him about why he started, and he mentions that this book took 6 years to write, which, and it shows. 6 years of work, and it absolutely shows here. There's a lot of little details that you don't really see. You get training montages, for example, but you don't really get anything in detail about how something works or why things are done in a certain way. It's typically just, I'm gonna go and learn to do this, and then in the next chapter that whoever it is has learned that skill. So it was nice to see actual detail or detailed training, so to speak. The battles and the fight scenes are very well written. They are very fluid. They move very quickly, and Ryan, the way Ryan writes it's a very visual writing style. He takes the time to kind of paint a picture in your mind without giving too many specifics. Vaelin is very much a character and a construct. So when we talk about a character, we're talking about a character in a book. A construct is more a framework. It's something for the reader to kind of put himself in that role. And Vaelin is interesting because he kind of falls into this middle ground where he's a character in that he has personality, he has things that he likes, that he doesn't like, he has feelings and that sort of thing. But he's also at least partly a construct in that he isn't defined or described in any particular way. He's described vaguely as having, as being a big guy who is covered in scars, and that is the extent of what we see. So the rest of it is left largely up to interpretation. We get little hints about his appearance, but nothing specific. Now, speaking of characters, all the characters are very well done. They are very well-rounded characters. Each one has their own personality. Vaelin kind of gets the most attention because he is the main character. But all the characters are memorable. I will admit, I did have to kind of go back a few times and look up certain characters because I couldn't remember who was who. But I only had to do that once or twice before I finally got it right. So yeah, that's kind of the character side of things. The writing style is a very visual one. It is easy enough to read. As I said, it took me a while to get into it, and that's kind of the thing, is you have to get into it and read quite a bit before Anthony Ryan's writing style makes sense. It kind of has to grow on you a little bit. I lost my train of thought now. So yeah, characters, writing style. The writing style's pretty good. Um, there is sort of a magic system here, but it's not really given any specifics. So it's not like in Harry Potter, for example, where everybody has to carry a wand, and there's a certain way you have to hold it, and a certain way you have to use it. And you're learning about potions, and you're learning about all this different stuff, and you can do pretty much anything as long as it's not against the law, right? It's also not like the inheritance cycle, the Aragon books, where you say a word and you do something. You know, a good example, for example, I mean, Aragon at one point uses the fire spell, Brisinga, and it kind of knocks him out cold. And he promptly gets into trouble with Brom about it because, well, he's not trained. And Brom then basically sits him down and says, look, here are the rules for using the ancient language of the elves and using magic in general. Here in Bloodsong, we don't really get that. There's this idea that a seventh order. Okay, so for the magic system to be explained, I kind of have to go into detail on this. There are 6 different orders of warriors, essentially. So you have the first. I just want to see if I can find it in the appendix or something here. No, it doesn't seem to. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, so there are 6 orders, but the only ones that are really focused on here are the 5th and 6th. And each order focuses on something different. So the 5th order, for example, focuses more on healing. I think it's the 3rd order focuses more on academia. And as the book kind of progresses, you get this hint of, okay, but there was a 7th order, and now it doesn't exist anymore. And this 7th order apparently studied what in the book is called the dark, basically black magic. That's my kind of interpretation. And they basically studied black magic, but you don't get any specific rules about it. There's no like real detail about what this system, how it all works, and what they were actually doing. And I actually kind of like that because it actually makes them more threatening because you don't actually know what they can do. On the other hand, it's also kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand you want to know what you're dealing with, and at the same time you like the fact that you don't get enough that everything is laid out. You have to kind of figure it out as you go. But yeah, so I kind of like that. In terms of the before I move on to the negatives, I think I kind of want to talk about the title of the book as well. Bloodsong. So the Bloodsong, the title is actually relating to a concept that they talk about in the book. The Bloodsong that they talk about in the book is kind of like a battle sense, where it's like a voice in the back of your head that tells you what you're supposed to do in certain situations. Um, that's pretty much the best way I can describe it. I just thought it was interesting that they talk about it as, they give it various names, but predominantly they call it a blood song, because apparently it's like your blood is I suppose singing to you and telling you what you're supposed to do. I don't know. Just kind of an interesting concept that was very well done. Okay, so moving on to the negatives. Um, I'm going to start with one that's more of a nitpick than anything else. The writing style does have to grow on you, like I said, and that was something I was not really expecting. I kind of thought, oh, I'll just pick it up and read it, and it'll be fine. It'll be like the Belgariad, or it'll be, something similar to that. And this is actually much more. It's much heavier than that, which is not something I was expecting. It's not that I really have a problem with that. As I said, it's more of a nitpick that I had to struggle to get through it. But yeah, but that's kind of just my experience. The other kind of, again, this is more of a nitpick than anything else. The book is split into 5 parts, and between each part you have a section that is marked the Vernier's account. Now, the Vernier is, of course, the scribe that Vaelin is talking to. And essentially, each part will end on a cliffhanger, and then it'll break into the Vernier's account. And the first time that this happened, I kind of went ballistic a little bit, because Vaelin was talking about his training and the various tests that he had to do to get to where he was, and then it kind of just cuts out and you're back on the boat with these 2 guys talking. I very quickly, but as I said, it's more of a nitpick, and the main issue that I have with that is that it really kind of threw me off. It's like, oh, you're just getting into the story, and then the story cuts out and you're looking at something else. So it was a little bit jarring the first time, the first kind of 2 occasions that it happened. But as I said, it's a nitpick. I understand why it was done, because you do need some form of transition, and you want to kind of track the story a little bit. And the Vernier's account sections are a good way to do that. So, but the only other issue that I really had with it was that Vaelin is almost too perfect. And this is something that I actually realized, more at the end of the book than anything else. Throughout the book, he goes through various trials and tribulations. If he makes a mistake and someone gets killed, it torments him. It absolutely torments him. He hates being caught up in the kind of the political side of things, which is that's actually something I forgot to mention earlier, is that there's a lot of political kind of intrigue in the book, and he kind of gets caught in the middle of it, much to his disgust. But I don't know. I mean, I figured that he'd get caught up in it eventually, but he always, he's very rude at times to people who you definitely don't want as enemies. but then he gets into a fight with someone, and you realize that, oh, well, he doesn't necessarily have to worry, because he can. The final test is a good example. The final test that he had to do was called the test of the sword, and basically what they did was they gave him a sword and they put him in an arena with 3 opponents, and it was 2 murderers and a rapist or something like that, and he had to fight and kill them all before they would consider him an official brother of the Sixth Order. And, you know, I looked at that sequence and thought, oh, okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's a good sequence. It's very well written, very exciting, but at the same time, you expect Vaelin to have some sort of difficulty. And he cuts down 2 men without a problem, and kind of fights with the 3rd one before cutting him down as well. So he's essentially cut down 3 guys without a problem. He goes into battle against hundreds of soldiers and comes back with almost no markings on him, which, I mean, it's just not really plausible. That said, he does get a couple of close calls in the book, which I guess kind of balances it out. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I think that's everything. I mean, Vaelin, and I mean, it's not just Vaelin either. If I'm being very frank, all the characters, as I said, pretty much everybody is likable in different ways. I mean, the king is just a snake in that he knows what to say and how to say it and when to say it to get what he wants. And he's not above lying to get what he wants. And what makes him, and he's a despicable character, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of why you like him, is because he is just that messed up. Yeah, I kind of wish, if I had to pinpoint one character that I had a problem with, it would most likely be the princess in the story. She appears 2 or 3 times, and it's kind of made out to be a big deal whenever she's involved with something, but she doesn't really contribute anything to the story. And I'd like to say it's the same for one of the healer characters, but at least the healer, Sharon, contributes. She actually takes part in the story and does something useful. The princess shows up 2 or 3 times in person, and she's mentioned a few other times in passing by other people, and that's it. She really doesn't seem to have any real impact on the story. But with that said, it is the first book in a trilogy. So maybe in the next 2 books, she becomes more of a character and more of a player in the game. Overall, if I can just add, I'm going to add one more con to this. I've probably already done that, but the pacing here is sort of all over the place. There are certain sequences and keep in mind this is just my impression, but there are certain sequences where everything moves really, really quickly, and then the next thing, everything kind of grinds to a halt, and then the book kind of becomes a bit of a slog to get through. But overall, my overall thoughts on this book are that it's good. It is very well written. It's definitely worth reading. Like I said at the start of the video, I borrowed this one from a friend of mine, and I actually enjoyed this book enough that I will most likely see if I can find a copy for myself, for my own bookshelf. So, yeah, that's Bloodsong. The review has been delayed several times, but there it is. It's definitely difficult to read. It's not really a book that I would recommend to someone who's looking to get into fantasy novels. I'd probably recommend something else, the Belgariad or the Harry Potter novels, for example. I would not recommend Bloodsong as an entry to fantasy novels, unless it's something that interests you and you're like super into this kind of thing. But I mean, and you could absolutely use this as an entry, but as I said, it does drag in places, which it might just kind of damage the experience a little bit. But that said, I mean, if you can push through those sections where it drags, if you find that sections drag the way I did, and you push through them, it is well worth it. I certainly enjoyed the book, and yeah, it's got its problems. This is Anthony Ryan's debut novel, and I mean, like I said, it took 6 years to write, so there's a lot of effort put into this. There's a lot of work that went into this, and it shows. It still has problems. There are some problems with the book, but they don't really take away from the experience for the most part. So, if you're heavily into fantasy novels, check it out. If you're looking to get into fantasy novels, and this sounds like something that you would be interested in reading, go for it. As I said, I personally would not recommend this as an entry-level fantasy novel, purely because it is a bit on the heavy side. But I mean, to each their own. If it's something that you think might interest you, check it out. And if it's something that doesn't interest you, well, at least you tried it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Bloodsong. Yeah, and now I'm starting to repeat myself. So a good book overall. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And to close off, I'm just gonna ask for you guys' thoughts. Have you read the book? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Why or why not? Who was your favorite character? Just leave your thoughts in the comment section if you feel like it. And thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, I'll see you for the next one. Cheers, guys.